I will do a more of an extended critique on the epistemological problems of secularism, as this Palestinian critic named is Wael Hallaq, who also is a let's say he is a non-theistic Greek Orthodox Christian from Palestine, born in Nazareth. So he is a Nazarene, which has two meanings in Arabic. Nazarene is the Arabic theological term for Christian. It's used in a sort of a derogatory sense, half not, half yes. But he also means he's from Nazareth. So there's a double entendre in Arabic. So you can call him, if you want, Dr. Wael Hallaq al-Nasara, which is, if you can pronounce that. Not long ago, this guy pulls up next to me. He must have been having a bad day. And he spits on me, and the spit lands on me. And he said to me, "You dirty, greasy wog, get out of our country." And I thought to myself, I'm getting called a wog. That's actually an upgrade. A wog is the Mediterranean, more the Greek Italian side. So I thought, oh, I've been upgraded from Arabic to Italian. Now, I actually think that a lot of the problem is to do with the fundamental disassociation between the is and the ought, which we have been experiencing ever since the negation of theocracy and the separation of church and state. I am absolutely for the separation of church and state. I love that, and may the chasm widen. Okay, so not only freedom of religion, but freedom from religion and freedom between religions. All of that, I think, was a step up from our nationalistic tendencies. Now we come into Dr. Wael Hallaq. Now, I'm going to give more of an in-depth analysis on irrational. So if you're into the really nerdy stuff, go to irrational. We'll do an in-depth one there. But my summary is that he was 100% right on certain points. I understand the Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian mentality in men is to talk with this force and and I'm awesome. And so I'm obviously biased against that. So I want to keep in mind with all of us that it is only my opinion. He might be the nicest guy in the world, and I just have that impression, and I could easily change my mind. I want to be clear on that. He did identify a few issues, which I think I've been saying for ages, and a lot of us have been realizing, which is the devaluing of spirituality, which we unfortunately did not extricate from religious dogma once we separated the church and the state. We got rid of our moral framework and just kept nothing. We just said, okay, we will work with positivistic type of analyses, which is that something exists only if we can measure it. But quantum mechanics has showed us that that's not even true. We have, of course, divorced ourselves from the idea of revelatory messaging, dogma, theocracy, and authority, and that's fantastic. But we got rid of that, and we, at the same time, I would say to our own detriment, sacrificed what people who were religious discovered to be true. There's a difference. What's his name? Isaac Newton was a Christian. He was anti-Catholic, Protestant, Christian, and alchemist. And he discovered / invented calculus. So we don't say calculus is Christian. Now, especially the Old Testament, more than the New Testament. I'm much more of a fan of the Old Testament in its written structure for this reason, which is that, to me, I interpret the Old Testament as an attempt by people via a flawed method, which is via assuming truth can be revealed as opposed to discovered through analysis, thought, and reason. This idea of revelation without thinking, bypassing the thought complex part of the brain, the critical thinking part, and just relying on cognitive ease, that to me was a disaster. But it was an attempt by people who happen to be religious to understand the world around them. And not just understand the world in terms of the is, but in terms of the ought. Now, the ought is something we have not been focusing on in Western societies since the Enlightenment. We have forgotten, and this is not completely true, but we have forgotten, as I've said this many times, how to navigate from one point to the next point. Okay, is the sky blue? Yes. Therefore, we should not be using fossil fuels. Well, on whose authority? Well, that's where the problem lies. We have to figure out a way that we can, through reason, through logic, navigate from one is to another, which is of course an ought, because an ought is a derivative of the ises. You need two ises to get an ought, because you have to be at one place and end up in another place, and that's where you get your ought, that's where you should go. Out of every single point that you can go, that's where you need to go. The question is why. I have said for a long time that there can be absolute truths, but via the seeing what is consistent amongst varying frames of reference. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Secularism is the negation of dogmatic thought. In other words, it's morally vacuous. Secularism doesn't tell you to do anything. You can't fight for secularism. It makes no sense. You're fighting for the absence of something. It doesn't make sense. So it was the first step. The problem with secularism is that it is not the final step. If you assume it's the final step, it then brings forth nihilism. And nihilism brings forth totalitarianism. And we know this. We know that communism is now being replaced with different variants of religious, there's different versions of Sharia, some extreme, some not. We have ISIS, other versions of Islamic State, the Muslim Brotherhood, which massacred its own president in 1980. I'm pretty sure it was 1980, Anwar Sadat, who Liran corrected me on, was the person who almost defeated Golda Meir in the Yom Kippur War. I thought it was, what's his name? The guy before him who died of the, mysterious heart attack. I always forget the other guy's name, man. Jamal Abdel Nasser. Wael Hallaq, he was absolutely correct in identifying that we do not have a structural framework in secularism. If you focus only on the individual, it's like focusing on the house, not on the house, but on the brick. You can't build a house by just putting bricks down and hoping that you end up with a house. You need a structural framework that you envisage that everybody agrees on. The issue is you can't be told this is how a house goes, and if you don't like it, I'm going to kill you, because ultimately you will have different communities all thinking their house should be done in a different way, and it leads to violence, fighting, and everything else. So the first step is to move into secularism, which is an empty field. Then we have to put within that empty field the certain rules via which we can all be governed. And it has to be rules that we believe in so that we govern ourselves internally. We can't be forced into submission, forcibly being nice to other people or behaving as if we were moral because it was placed upon us via external pressure by the state. That can't happen. I completely agree with him on that. But what I definitely disagree with him on is that somehow secularism is on equal playing field with other ideological narratives. And he uses a little bit of Foucault to try and push his point forward. Irrational guys, if you really want the big one, the whole reason, jump onto there and we'll talk about it. So it seems to me that the absence of a belief structure seems to have humans want to resort to some sort of belief structure that they are unaware is a belief structure. And this is the inescapability of religion. If you do nothing but be anti or pro specific world religions, it's in mathematical terms, it's being unable to leave a vector space. So you can't get out of the number system by adding a number to a number. You'll always end up with a number. 2 plus 2 is 4. A million plus a million is 2 million. So the answer is always a number. So if you are against a religion, you can't escape the idea of thinking religiously just by escaping one religion, because you're just you're going outside of that domain, but you're still stuck by navigating the world via your anti-religious views, which itself is a religion. You're just a reverse religion. And so if you don't have one, absolutely, you will resort to communism and regressivism. Yes, progress can mean, how do we get into a better point? Well, we were able to escape religious theocracy, and were able to escape the idea of states, which preceded the Enlightenment. They were not a consequence of the Enlightenment. That's what Wael said. The states were religious. They were not secular. The states, and he's talking about the modern states. I don't know what he means by modern, but the modern state started from 1648. These were actual states. These fit the states in the most part that led to the First World War. And these states were religiously based. It was like, okay, we can't kill each other, so that version of Christianity goes over there. Our version of Christianity goes over here, and we'll all just live without killing each other. In our state, you have to be Catholic. In yours, you have to be Lutheran. In yours, you have to be Anglican, etc., etc. And that's where the final borders ended up. Oh, sorry. Okay, no. Communism was an ideology that was antithetical to Western style democracies. And once communism ended up being defeated between 1989 and 1991, what was left in the communist states were peoples who had their religion, and most of the time it was Islam. And so out of that, there has emerged different versions of Islam. Some are violent, some are not. Okay, some have certain beliefs, some don't. But some of those, okay, the minority of those became Islamic State, became Boko Haram, etc., etc. And they're only loosely connected to the rest of variants of Islam. So they're not obviously, they're mostly from the Sunnah side and mostly from the Salafist side. You have one Shia version, but that's more of a Shia / nationalistic one in Iran. It's less to do with religion, in the same way that ISIS was more about a specific fundamentalist ideology, and they replaced communism. So as a rival to Western democracies. And I say the problem, as I've said before, the problem is not Islam or Christianity, etc., etc. The problem is the weakness of Western secular societies, in the fact that they do not have a collective moral framework. And I've said this before, socialism is completely misguided as a solution, and so is capitalism. It's the synthesis between understanding the individual's role in society as well as the structure of society itself. Now, Wael Hallaq goes the other way. He thinks the individual should be put last. I don't think so. I don't think that an individual should lose their rights for the sake of something like, I don't know, some sort of moral framework about which we all have to agree. I do agree with him that the consequence of not having a moral framework is that the individuals will suffer. So that he didn't say that, but I'm going to word it that way to make it more palatable, let's just say. That's why I'm interested in the secular utility of religion. Absolutely. Yes, the secular utility of religion. Religion has a secular utility. Absolutely. And that is the overlay which we need to add to the morally vacuous state that we have now, being, and state of being. Being secularism. Secularism is the absence of the theocratic. But what we didn't understand as a younger species 100, 200 years ago, some of us did, but most of us did not understand that the absence of an organized religion leads to the creation of an unorganized religion. You cannot leave religion by physically exiting a specific religion. You have to leave the thinking process, which is religious style thinking. In other words, you reach a conclusion that fits your preconceived bias without enough evidence to justify it. Absolutely never going to work. You can't do it. So yes, we need to, of course, understand Enlightenment style thinking. How do we get from one place to the next? How do we, and I didn't talk about my reference framing, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but we have to extricate from religion, rites of passage, community. This type of discussion is a replacement for church. We are literally replacing it. We're upgrading it. We're not taking the idea of revelation and applying it in a new context. We are taking the idea of thinking, which is completely antithetical to religious dogma. It's not that you cannot have religious dogma in any context and think freely. They do not work. They're completely antithetical to each other axiomatically. And so that's what we're doing now. We need more of this around the world, constant discussions, because most of the things we're going to be talking about are either going to be wrong or wrong in the long term. They're not going to be true for all time. Now, this comes to my, and I'm going to look at the chats in a second, but this comes to my my application of point of reference. So what point of reference is different for almost everybody, almost all the time. But a minuscule subset of all points within a reference frame are actually static throughout every possible reference. So with space-time, time is relative, speed is relative, position is relative, everything is relative, right? But if you put them together in 4 dimensions, it turns out that a subset of these points being X, Y, Z, W, meaning all 4 points, a point in space, the 3-dimension of space, and a point in time, that becomes static. And if you use something called it doesn't matter, it's called a Lorentz transformation, but that, for anyone who's mathematically inclined, you can actually find all of these points and realize that they're fixed. And those points are absolutely true in our universe. They're the ones that are not relatively true, they're absolutely true. So we need to find that in our particular religious narratives, take them out piece by piece, take the narratives and understand them as people attempting to discover what was true, figure out which ones are true only from one point of reference versus another point of reference. So for example, there's an injunction in chapter 4 of the Quran al-Karim which talks about women getting half of what men get. Now, in a point in time, in a point of the earth in the past, that would have been a good thing because it was an upgrade from women getting nothing. Okay, in our current point in time, it's not a good thing. Okay, because we've now come to realize that the idea of people being treated, say, with some varying degree of equity based upon some sort of immutable characteristic is absurd. So, and we say it's absurd for many reasons, and we mostly agree, so I'm not going to get into it now. So we can say, well, that was true at the time, it's no longer true. Okay, so we take that part out, but we keep the part that says that if someone, innocent person is being attacked, you need to defend that person with your life. So we might want to keep that one. Okay, but we are deciding what we're keeping out of all of these. And when I say we want to keep it, we find that that might be a universal truth amongst every narrative around the world. That might be the case. I don't know. It's just a really bad example, right? But the point is that we find what's fixed amongst all of these points and take them out and say, this is a depth of morality which we can take from our ancestors that used to believe in the rest of it. We don't believe in that crap now, but we can take those points which we see across cultures are fixed. The same thing with men and women. We know that across every culture throughout time, more than 95%, according to Dr. Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Hyen, I think it's Dr. Heather Hyen. I'm going to try Heather Hyen, I think. 95% of jobs have been done by both men and women, but there are 5% that have not. So one of the jobs that have not been done by anyone except men was, I think, smeltering or sword making or something like that. Now, I don't know the exact facts. Obviously, it's not my domain. But the point is that you can find what's fixed throughout time, and it still is real, but it's a lot less than what we think. All right, so I will, as always, love all your feedback. And this is a team effort, man. This is Gabsmack. We're a team. We are trying to figure out how to move forward. I think it's unbelievably important. And without that, we're just wasting our time. Whether we like it or not, we're on the same ship, right? So let's deal with it. Anyway, this type of thinking is what we need to do with everything. With Palestine, with Israel, with Lebanon, with America, with the natives. Gabriella. With Antarctica. Somebody brought up something about Antarctica they want me to discuss, which is the end of the treaty in 2050. And that's going to be I can see that as being a disaster. The Titanic, yeah. All right, I will love you and leave you. And until next time, don't forget to take life one smack at a time. There we go. We're going to have to make this a topic because I am convinced I'm probably the only, say, as far as I know, it seems that our channel is the only one that criticizes Trump without calling him Hitler or something stupid like that. And I am convinced that there is a messianic movement on the authoritarian, fake-ass leftist end of the spectrum, pretending to be progressive, which is looking to shut down anyone who helps Trump supporters coalesce. So it's not enough that people denounce Trump. It has to be that Trump supporters cannot be in a group. They have to be dispersed. It's sort of like if you have pigeons, you've got to get a hose and blow them away. And that's what this messianic, authoritarian religious movement that's hijacked progressivism. And I insult them, and I would ridicule them, and I would say, I will not live progressivism. Progressivism is the idea of progress. In other words, it's moving in a direction that has a net benefit. That is progress. At calling yourself progressive and then trying to shut everyone else down is regressive. And I promise you now, any liberal that doesn't stand up and say this with me, anyone who stays silent, right, this will have a counter effect. This will cause a Trump win in 2020. What did I say? I said this back in 2016 when I had 5 followers. This shit will create more Trump supporters. It will unify the Trump supporters, and it will help reconfirm the schizophrenic, paranoid Alex Joneses of the world who think the world is out to get them, because part of the world is out to get them. It's not all of the world. Most liberals are not out to get them. Most liberals, look at Steven Pinker and everyone he speaks to, they say we want Jonathan Haidt, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, all of Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein. The list keeps going. I think it's David Pachman, I think, even though he's a bit more radical. But none of these people want to shut down Trump supporters. And it's so important that we recognize that. I never, ever, ever want to shut down a Trump supporter. What I want is for you to come on, talk about your problem, say, I acknowledge that problem. I acknowledge that problem. The solution's incorrect, and this is why I think it's incorrect. And that is the way that we win. You can't do it by force. I don't understand what they're thinking to want to relive the French Revolution. Like, is it not enough, the amount of heads that were cut off in the name of fake-ass progressivism, which itself was a religion?